all these recordings. So I would like to welcome Precious Golden from Portland Community College. She will be talking about addressing ableism with empathy in the classroom. Before we start our presentation, I would like to remind you a few items. We are using automated Zoom captions during the session, and we will edit the recording transcripts before we share them with you. At the bottom of the Zoom window, there's a closed caption button, and you will see the live transcript text underneath that button. Select to turn them on or off as you prefer. And please note that this session is being recorded. And also, please pose your questions in the chat box. We will certainly address these questions during or towards the end of the presentation, depending on the preference of Precious, our presenter. And also, we're going to share a Padlet link with you to continue this conversation even after this conference. So please use the Padlet board to share your questions, share your comments. I believe Precious will be looking at the Padlet board after the conference as well, just in case you need to ask another question later on. So I'm so excited to pass the microphone to Precious Golden, and she will be talking about addressing ableism with empathy in the classroom. Welcome, Precious.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join me today to discuss ableism in the classroom and how to make education more accessible to your students with disabilities. Oh, there we go. Sorry, my name is Precious Golden. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I identify as a white, middle-aged, cisgendered woman. I have short, bright red curly hair, and I wear black rimmed glasses. I am a disabled student at PCC, Portland Community College. I have progressive multiple sclerosis, and I use a manual wheelchair. I also work as an accessibility advocate in the recently renamed Accessible Education Department. And I also work as the Employment Week coordinator for the Accessibility First Employment Week at PCC. I've included my email down below. It's precious.golden@pcc.edu, and I'll share that with you again at the end. I've laid out some goals for our time together. Hopefully, at the end of this presentation, you will have learned some ways to make education more accessible for your students. You will have learned how sympathy and empathy impact disabled students. You'll have a little bit better understanding of the history of disability in our society. You'll be able to understand and identify ableism and understand the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, but also the spirit of it, and learn ways to make your courses more accessible to students. I want to quickly acknowledge that my presentation pulls together many ideas from other presentations offered by disability services at PCC, as well as ideas from the larger disability rights movement. I want to start by sharing a video. It's a short video. Recently, last year, I was awarded a scholarship through the PCC Foundation. And they were good enough to feature me in, oh, thank you very much, feature me in their annual fundraiser. And part of what they did is they filmed this video about my life as a disabled student. And I think they did a really good job sharing a perspective of what life is like for a disabled student. And while this is my story, the challenges that I face are not unique. And I'm sure that many of your students or possibly yourselves meet many of these same challenges. And so I would like to share this video with you to give you an accurate portrayal of my life. whole life, I've loved art and I've loved to paint. Watercolor is my favorite. When I paint, I think about the impermanence. Everything here is temporary. And for me, it really helps me focus in and treasure all that I have in the moment, in the present. Because I know it's fleeting and it will pass. And it helps me cope with my disease too. Living with a progressive form of MS. People with disabilities, they're amazing. They are strong because they have to be, right? And having a disability creates a lot of really unique skills in somebody. For instance, I am an amazing problem solver. Like, I have to be very, very creative and quick and not get upset when I see a problem, right? Just think, okay, how can I solve this? How can I get around it? I was working a retail job, and my MS was progressing, and I was facing a lot of ableism, to be quite honest, and especially in the workplace, and I wasn't able to get accommodated. And I lost my job. And I had difficulty finding new employment. And so I decided to go back to school and find out what I could do to help that situation. I love art, and I thought initially if I could get a degree in art and somehow have a position in the community, have a visible position of employment, just by virtue of that, it would break down a lot of the stereotypes about disabilities. I was really involved with disability services the first year, and for my second year at PCC, I got offered a job as an accessibility advocate. I have been able to do so much as an accessibility advocate. It's been a dream, like the Accessibility First Employment Week. I'm trying to get employers to think about disability differently and think about disability creatively and all the benefits that somebody that lives with a disability can bring to the workplace. What those accommodations look like, why they should be made, why it's helpful to make them, and what it looks like when you have a supportive, inclusive environment for somebody to thrive. For persons with disabilities, the pandemic made things incredibly accessible. I could not have done a fraction of what I've done if I wasn't able to do this remotely. Having a disability, things are harder and slower physically for me, just like logistically. For instance, using a wheelchair, the time it takes for me to get my coffee, to take a shower, to get to my car, to get loaded into my car and wheel across campus and to a class or something, that's a lot of work, and it's exhausting, and it also takes a lot of time. And I'm really afraid that all this is going to go away. It's night and day in my life, you know, to even have the opportunity to get like some work experience and to get like a good job and to get like off of disability and like not live in poverty anymore. I will graduate next year. And when I do, I'll have 2 years of work experience in the field that I want to work in. I will have my associate's degree. I I didn't have the PCC Foundation Scholarship, I would have had to take out a student loan. And so yeah, it's a huge, huge, huge impact in my life. A college education is something that I always aspire to. It's been a dream of mine. I might cry. Sorry. This is something that I've wanted my whole life, and something that I've tried to get my whole life, and it just wasn't always available to me. Before the pandemic, before PCC, my life was so different, and this is the life that I've always dreamed of. At least I'm getting close to it. Okay, so thank you. Yeah, I see there was, oh, thank you for the dandelions watercolor. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for taking some time to look at my life a little bit and hopefully think of your students' lives and your students with disabilities' lives a little bit differently and understand the impact that accessible education has. And yes, I saw somebody raise their hand maybe. By the way, please just speak up if you've got a question. I'm happy to take them popcorn style throughout the presentation. Did somebody have a question? No. Okay. So I shared that video because I really wanted to hopefully drive home the importance of accessibility and what a big difference that makes in the lives of everybody. And I want to next talk about just a little bit sympathy versus empathy. And this is something I will talk about at the end of my presentation as well. But I want you to start to think about the differences between sympathy and empathy, because I feel that sympathy is hurtful and damaging and unhelpful, whereas empathy is healing and very helpful. Sympathy requires you to feel for somebody, whereas empathy requires that you actually feel with somebody. And sympathy is a downward comparison, right? It's comparing somebody's situation to my own. Why is mine better? I feel bad for them. Empathy is an equal comparison, though. Sympathy is equal to pity, and empathy is equal to support. So I would just like you to keep that in mind as we are talking, as I am talking about the aspects of ableism over the next half hour or so. I would like to give you a very, very brief overview of disability history in our society, only because it's really important to know where we are now and to understand the work that we have to still do. And it's important to know where we've come from. So for my very, very brief disability history lesson, in the Dark Ages, disability was seen as a curse. And then during the Renaissance, disability was seen as something that could be cured. And this led the way for the medical field to capitalize on us. Lobotomies were performed, persons with disabilities were institutionalized, and society has portrayed us as scary in film and media and dangerous. And then, of course, we have lovely eugenics. For those of you that don't know, eugenics is a form of social Darwinism, and it's the theory of improving the human race by breeding the best genetics. And it's been discredited and as unscientific and racially biased because the Nazis used it as justification for their treatment of the Jews, disabled people, and minority groups. And it still is used for those reasons. Many people are unaware that it was actually until 1974 against the law for me and people like me to be seen in public. Our society instituted something called ugly laws, which stated that no person who is diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed so as to be unsightly or disgusting is allowed to be seen in the public, in the city, or show themselves to public view. Portland's ugly law was eradicated in 1974. That was not very long ago. But the 60s civil rights movement paved the way and a big push for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And in 1973, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was brought into, signed into law. And it was the first disability civil rights law to be enacted, and it prohibited discrimination against people with disabilities in programs that received federal financial assistance. Finally, in 1974, Portland, my city, repealed its ugly law, and we were not the last. Chicago was the same year, the last city to repeal this law. As hopefully most of us here know, when you change the law, that doesn't mean that we change minds immediately. However, 26 short years after that, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or excuse me, 16 short years after that, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law by George H.W. Bush, prohibiting discrimination against people with disabilities in several areas, including employment, transportation, education, public accommodations, communications, and access to state and local government, regardless of whether or not they received federal funding, by the way. But laws against persons with disabilities are still being made and enforced even today. In my city, in Portland, in the early 2000s, Mayor Sam Adams announced a sidewalk management plan because we have a terrible houseless problem here in Portland, and houseless people occupying and living on the streets. So Mayor Sam Adams announced a sidewalk management plan, creating a pedestrian use zone, saying that the sidewalks needed to be cleared based on the ADA, that persons with disabilities needed a clear sidewalk to move past. The problem is that the majority of people who are houseless, sorry. Sorry. And the problem is that the majority of people who are houseless because they are disabled. And so it's taking this law and using it against the same people that it was designed to protect. In Multnomah County, where Portland is, 57% of the houseless population is disabled. Now, I do not want to make this a workshop on Portland, kind of do, but I won't. I'll move on, because I do want to make you aware of modern day eugenics. They're happening today, and I just want to make you aware of that in the forms of genetic testing, sperm and egg donor selection. And in a time when we are seeing abortion rights and abortion laws rolled back in a way that we haven't since 1974, it is important to note that late-term abortions are allowed in all 50 states for any fetal abnormality. Any fetal abnormality. So it is acceptable to terminate a pregnancy at any point for any fetal abnormality, intellectual, physical abnormality. This includes missing limbs, includes Down syndrome. And there are many people who have Down syndrome who live independently and are full contributing members of society. And to place value, it's still going on today. And so I hope that after today, you will think more about disability and illness in hopefully a bit of a different light. Because there's nothing wrong with disability. Disability and inability are not synonymous with each other. My life is as valuable as yours. And the thing of it is that people without disability are just temporarily abled. This is something that affects us all and can affect us all if it hasn't already, because disability is the only marginalized category that you can unexpectedly find yourself in. And when you do, 26% of Americans have. So when you do, when your spouse does, when your child does, when your parent, sibling, etc., what will that world look like? Will education be accessible for them? Will they have a path to opportunity? In 2019, 26% of Americans lived with a disability. At least that we know of, that identified and said, hey, I have a disability. that are, in 2021, 19.3% of them were employed. That's a fraction. And of that 19.3%, 29% were only employed part-time. I was one of those 29%. Employers are required to abide by the ADA2. This is your right, it is my right, it is everybody's right. And so it's very important that we all do what we can to ensure that this right is carried out. So this again brings us back to sympathy and empathy. And hopefully now you can see a little bit more how sympathy is a privilege and a downward comparison in respect to disability, and how empathy can be supportive. How empathy asks, how would I feel if I woke up with MS? How would I feel if I got diagnosed and then my MS was progressing? How would I feel? Would I feel as though my life was over? My future was over? Maybe if everybody else around you kind of had that attitude, but hopefully not. Hopefully you would see a lot of hope, and hopefully those around you would as well. Because empathy ensures that the conversation continues when sympathy ends that conversation. Empathy asks, what could be done? What can be done? How can I help? By definition, ableism is discrimination and social prejudice against people with disabilities, and it characterizes people as defined by their disability and is inferior to the non-disabled. Excuse me, I think I skipped ahead. And this shows up in the classroom in several ways. Most often when, I think when accommodations are requested. Some of the ways that I've seen it show up is when instructors engage with students, engage in students, debate with students about fairness to other non-disabled students. when granting the accommodations, or making assumptions about a student's physical or mental capability to perform in their class, to succeed in their class, or even more troublesome, in a particular field. In the medical industry, this is a particular problem. Making assumptions about the reason, about why the student is requesting the accommodations in the first place, or refusing to make accommodations for a student that has already been approved for them. When I first started doing some work as an accessibility advocate at PCC and advocating for the students' accessibility there, I was surprised to find out that one of the reasons why accommodations are often denied to students is because many instructors feel that it allows for cheating. It just makes it easier for the student to cheat. And so they were denying accommodation based on that. And that was very troublesome. And that's straight up ableist. Accommodations do not grant extra privileges. They address barriers to accessible education. So please assume that your students are there to learn. From a student's perspective, things that have made it difficult for me to learn is not having accessible materials. I have multiple sclerosis, and it's a neurological disease. And so it affects me cognitively, and it also affects my vision. I'm low vision and I have double vision. And so I need my materials large print, and I also need them in audio format. When my materials are not accessible, then I have to request that from my professor, my instructor. I have to wait for them to become made accessible. And then I am put further behind in my class. And as a student with a disability, I start out behind, and it is very hard for me to keep up. So even getting behind a few days or a week can really make or break success in a term for me. Having your syllabus available early is incredibly helpful, because as a student with a disability, I don't know exactly what accommodations I'm going to need before each term. Every course is different. Every instructor is different. There are expectations are different for each class, each term that I have. So I don't know what my challenges are going to be necessarily before I start each class. So having the syllabus available to me like a week or a week and a half before classes start is hugely helpful, because then I can see I have an idea, at least, what kind of expectation is going to be there for the class, and how I'm going to be, or if I'm going to be able to manage that with my other responsibilities and other classes. So you don't need to make your entire class available, but if you can make your syllabus available early, that would be hugely helpful. And then also just going in with the mindset of not having that automatic denial for an accommodation request, and really going in with a flexible mindset on how you can help your students succeed. Please remember that approved accommodations are about accessible education, and that there is an actual approval process. It's not as though students can just walk into accessible education or disability services at the college and or put in a form and say, hey, I would just like these approved accommodations. You actually have to show documentation, and there's a process. And so if a student has registered for your class and you get notification that they have approved accommodation, please know that Disability Services has already done their job. The student has already been vetted, so to speak, for these accommodations. So once they've been approved, you should probably get like a list of some approved accommodations. Just know that this is only the start of what's possible. It is not the limit of what's possible. The law, the ADA law, is really broad, and it allows the instructor and the institution really just carte blanche to do whatever's needed to help your students succeed and to break down any barriers that that student might meet. And so yeah, if you have any questions, ask your disability services before you deny any accommodation. Because when you deny a student an accommodation, it does a lot of things to that student. It breaks their spirit. I mean, there's no nice way to say it. And it just makes things harder. So even if you're not sure if you should grant a student an accommodation, before you deny them an accommodation, please reach out to Disability Services. And if they've not been approved for accommodations already, please don't deny your student. Again, it really does break their spirit. Just remind your student that there is Disability Services, that there is a path to get supported, and that you and the college are there to support the student and help them get whatever support they need to make sure that they're successful and get through your course and through college successfully. I have a couple suggested questions to ask yourself about accessibility each term. You can ask yourself how you've made things more or less accessible for your students with disabilities in the past and what you can do in the future to make things more accessible. You can look at your materials and make sure they're all accessible. You can review your syllabus, and you can consider releasing it early. Please consider releasing it early. I'll tell you, I have spent a lot of time with other students with disabilities over the past couple of years, and that seems to really be the most popular one is please release your syllabus early. And you can become an anti-ableist. You can examine your own beliefs and attitudes about disability. You can speak up when you hear ableist comments. When you do, please call people in rather than out, right? Be an ally and an advocate for persons with disabilities, and educate others with kindness and with empathy, because we are all a product of this very unequal system that has promoted eugenics for a long time. So let's be kind to each other and call each other in and help each other grow into a better, more inclusive world. And with that, I will let you know that at PCC, we are pushing, the students are pushing hard for a disability cultural center. We have many other identity centers, the Women's Center, the Queer Center, the Veteran Center, but we do not have one for disability. We have accessible education and we have disability services, and I believe Peralta is the same, correct me if I'm wrong, but there really is a need for an identity center separate from accessibility education, because accessibility education's function is to meet accessibility needs and to process accommodation requests. It is not there to meet the many needs of students with disabilities, which there are many. And having a disability is exceptionally isolating. And so the college really does need to provide a space for students to congregate and come together. And yeah, so I have, there's a petition going, and I would love if you would sign it. We have, I would really appreciate it if you would sign it. I'm presenting it to our interim vice president of student affairs. And I think we have a really, really good chance of getting a disability cultural center established at PCC this year. Finally, this is how the Veterans Center was started at our college as well. So thank you. That's all I have. Thank you so much for listening to me go on about this. Thank you, really, thank you.
Precious, I don't know what to say. Thank you so much. Thank you for reminding us and also make us become more aware of some of the things. And you touched on wonderful things, including like differences between empathy and sympathy, right? Inability and disability. These are the things that we should know for sure what the differences are. So thank you for reminding us all these things. And also one thing you said about syllabus, that is so true. And listening to your perspective, saying that having that syllabus ready a couple of weeks ahead of time, because accommodations might change based on the course, based on the requirements. So having your syllabus before the course starts will help you a lot. And thank you so much for reminding us that as instructors, as teachers, as educators, that is so crucial to share our syllabus with students, right? Thank you very much. I believe you will get some questions from the audience, and please look at the chat box as well. They're appreciating you.
Thank you. Yes, I will go through the chat now. I have not looked at it.
Yes. And let's see. I'm checking the chat box if there's any questions.
Oh, got it. Oh, sorry, the link in the chat.
They are appreciating you right now. Yes. And please share the link for the petition in the chat box so that we can all support you on this as well.
Yes, thank you. I am figuring out how to stop sharing my screen before I can do that and get, there we go.
And I believe some people from the audience would like to get permission to use that video if it's okay, or if you're willing to share it with us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let me grab these.
And I see Tony, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tony Feaster from Southwestern College down San Diego way. And I really appreciated your presentation. I teach adapted exercise courses at my college. And I also teach a class for like personal trainers on working with all kinds of populations. So yeah, that video, I would really love to provide it to them, especially right now during COVID. They're not getting the chance to work with students that they normally would. So I try to bring in real world experiences and help them kind of widen their view and decrease some instances of ableism, you know, that are there. So yes, thank you for sharing that. I looked for it, I Googled it, but I couldn't find it. So thank you very much for your talk and being here with us.
Thank you so much. I put both, now that I've stopped sharing my screen, I've shared the links in the chat, and I see some questions in the chat. Isn't it illegal to do that? Yes, it is illegal to do that, to deny accommodation or to discriminate, I'm guessing. But the thing is that the laws are only good when people abide by them. And if we break the law, the only consequence is going to happen if somebody breaks the law. The only way a consequence is going to happen is if I pursue recourse, right? And I really don't want to have to go pursue recourse and discrimination. And I have in the past, and it takes a lot of time. And really, I would just rather get an education and live my life. And so it's a fight and it's a process. And yeah, so that's why it's important to educate ourselves before those illegal things happen, because it doesn't matter. It just needs to not happen, right?
And Precious, we have one more question in the chat box. That's a great question. What language would you recommend we include on our syllabus to encourage our students who choose not to self-identify as having a disability to start using DSS?
You know, that's a tough one, because it's a discussion that it's a tough one because there's no concrete answer. It's a tough one because identity is ongoing conversation that we have a lot among my group of disabled people. Right now, we live very much in a don't ask, don't tell environment surrounding disability. And that is so unhealthy, that we've hopefully have learned that is so unhealthy to have a don't ask, don't tell environment. But the reality is that that's what we exist in, especially in the workforce. And that's why I'm working so hard to change that with the Accessibility First Employment Week and having workshops for employers to start to see disability in a different light. Because, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. There are consequences to disclosing. And I think the only way to counteract that is to mitigate those consequences, right? Not to just not disclose or to change the language or to mask it. I think that accessible education is doing that a little bit, but you know, it's a progress. It's all a work in progress. So I would call it for what it is, and it's accessible education and it's disability services. And if you need it, you need it. I don't, you know, yeah. Sorry, I can't be more helpful. I don't have a sugar-coated way, and I don't think you should sugarcoat it, is my opinion.
Thank you, Precious. Any other questions?
Tony, was that hand from earlier? Okay. Irina's put something in the chat here. That would be awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. I like that language a lot. And I think what's important about that language is that you're not making it sound like accessibility is a bad thing, right? So I think that's the language that would be helpful, Anita, right there with what Irina shared, is that talking about how it's okay and you're excited to access and help your students access these services.
And what I liked about that statement is the last sentence especially. We are excited to work together to make sure this course is accessible for you.
For sure. Every disability statement in all of my syllabi are pretty, you know, your standard inclusion statement. And so I really like that because it is it's more welcoming language and whatnot. So thank you. And thank you for bringing that up too, because that's an aspect that I haven't really thought much about, to be honest. Thinking about more the actual accessibility mechanics of it, right? But not the welcoming accessibility of things. I think that's definitely something to think about. Yeah. Thank you so much. Really appreciate this conversation.
And if you would like to continue the conversation, I just put the Padlet link in the chat box. Even after this conference, I'm hoping Precious will continue looking at that Padlet board, if just in case there are other questions coming up for you or any resources. So please feel free to share any comments, any questions on the Padlet link.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if we don't have any final comments or questions, we can end the session here. Precious, thank you so much again for your time and for being with us. It was very eye-opening to listen to you. And very excited to share this video with others, with everyone else in our colleges, universities. So thank you so much for giving permission us to share that video as well. And our next session in this room will be raising an eyebrow at grades, a very brief introduction to ungrading. So if you would like to join that session, please stay here and enjoy the rest of the conference.